Know, O Prince, that between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Aias, there was an age undreamed of, when shining kingdoms lay spread across the world like blue mantles beneath the stars. These words from the Numidian chronicles harken back to the Hyborian Age, a doomed epoch of savagery and splendor between two great civilization-shattering catastrophes. Named for the Hybori, hardy Northmen who had come to dominate much of the world in the 3,000 years since the Great Cataclysm had swallowed Atlantis and Lemuria. The Hyborian Age saw powerful kingdoms rise from the old world's ashes, and mighty heroes traveled the land, seeking their fortunes, building legends wherever they passed. In this first video on the world of Conan, we will explore the backdrop in which two of the greatest heroes of this age would meet for the first time, while serving as common mercenaries in a bloody holy war, the War of the Tarim. The origins of this conflict lay in the dying fires of the Great Cataclysm. When the islands making up barbarous Lemuria sank beneath the ocean, a mystic named Tarim led his people on a voyage west to safety, crossing raging seas and unfriendly kingdoms to settle on the eastern banks of the inland Vilayet Sea. There, the descendants of the Lemurian exiles became the Hyrcanians, famed for their archery and horsemanship, and centuries later, Hyrcanian settlers would found Agripor on the west bank of the Vilayet, a colony that would soon grow to eclipse all of the city-states of the east as the capital of the growing kingdom of Turan. Throughout these long centuries on the steppes, Tarim remained a figure of religious devotion to Hyrcanians on both sides of the Vilayet, with one of his direct descendants in each generation being worshipped as his reincarnation and a living demigod. For a city to host the living Tarim marked it as the greatest and most prestigious of the Hyrcanian city-states, a jealously guarded honor that would spark a great deal of chaos and bloodshed between Turan and their chief trading rival, the wealthy city-state of Macalette on Vilayet's eastern shores. With Turan recognized by most as the most powerful Hyrcanian polity of the age, its capital of Agripor had long been the seat of the living Tarim, who was held in guarded seclusion in a great temple and concealed from the eyes of the adoring faithful below. But unbeknownst to King Yildiz and his royal court, a strange upheaval was taking place in the palace of Macalette. Macalette's kindly but inexperienced young king, Enatum, had begun to accept the counsel of one Karim Akkad, who had risen to become the high priest of Tarim within Macalette through sorcerous means, more in service of his own ambitions than any faith in the living god. With Enatum kept drugged and contented by the magician's potions, Karim Akkad would become ever more the power behind Macalette's throne, until he was able to convince the king to order a theft that would bring the armies of Turan to his gates, the kidnapping of the living Tarim from the temple in Agripor. It is not difficult to see Karim Akkad's motivation in such a rash action. While his position as high priest in Macalette had certainly made the magician influential within the city-state, once the living Tarim dwelt within the temple he presided over, his renown and influence would be felt everywhere Hyrcanians lived and prayed. But first, he and Macalette would have to withstand the vengeful Turanians. Enraged by the theft, Yildiz immediately declared a holy war against Macalette to recover Tarim to his rightful home, placing his warrior son, Prince Yezdigerd, in command of a fleet that crossed the Vilayet to lay siege to Macalette only a few short weeks after the kidnapping. On its face, the conflict might have seemed a one-sided one. For all its wealth, Macalette was but a single city-state, while Turan's growing empire had been the scourge of the Western kingdoms for centuries. Her fearsome horsemen, clad in gleaming steel, silk and gold, and immortalized in the pages of the Numidian chronicles, could have trampled a dozen Macalettes. But Turan was no sea power. While it did maintain a modest fleet to combat piracy on the Vilayet, its ambitions were westward across the steppes and deserts, and it lacked enough ships and experienced captains to adequately transport its cavalry-heavy army across the inland sea. and an insult as grave as the living Tarim's kidnapping could not be ignored for the length of time it would take to expand the fleet sufficiently for such a task. The fleet that departed Agripur under Yezdigerd's command thus consisted of only a few dozen ships, the army within a mere fraction of Turan's full strength and inexperienced in serious naval operations. Macalette was hardly better equipped or prepared than Turan, however, despite being the aggressor in the conflict. Karimov, trusting in his sorcery and political intrigues, cared little for the logistics of mundane rulership and warfare, and sent no fleets or saboteurs to disrupt the Turanians' voyage. The only notable incident on the journey across the Viliad was the rescue of two shipwrecked foreigners, Fafnir of Vanaheim and Conan of Cimmeria, who begrudgingly entered service as mercenaries under the leadership of Yezdigerd's most trusted officer, Captain Balthaz. When the still unopposed fleet arrived before Macalette, shortly after the rescue of the two castaways, the unpreparedness of both sides would be on full display. Unused to sieges by sea, and not seeing any defenders on the walls, the ships of Turan began sailing directly for the city's main quay. Once they drew closer to Macalette's domed towers and docked merchant vessels, however, the obvious trap they were sailing into was sprung, and volleys of flaming arrows from the hidden bowmen began to take their toll. Caught in disarray, the bulk of the fleet split off from the attack, with the Turanian soldiers that did make landfall in the quay finding the whole of Macalette's defenders arrayed to meet them. Outmatched, the scattered landing parties were driven back to their ships or into the ocean, leaving dead Turanians scattered about the quay to mark the disastrous first clashes. Yezdigerd's army would not be denied its holy prize so easily, however. Caught in the teeth of Macalette's archers, several ships of the Turanian fleet, including that of Captain Balthaz, found a new landing site along the unfinished seawalls surrounding the palace courtyard, and landed a desperate force within bowshot of both the royals of Macalette and the living Tarim, while their defenders continued to hold the quay. With seemingly only palace guards and servants to bar their path, Balthaz's force might have ended the Siege of Makkalet as quickly as it began, but before they could storm the palace, they would first have to contend with the sorceries of Karimov, observing the attackers unafraid from a balcony. As the attackers drew near the barred palace gates, they unexpectedly rose open in greeting, revealing 9 soldiers within, flanked by some dozen horsemen. Such a small force sallying forth against a few hundred onrushing Turanians would have been suicide had the 9 been mortal flesh and blood. But as they stepped into the sun of the courtyard, the attackers beheld 9 ghoulish, skeletal figures standing to meet them like walking cadavers. To their further shock, as Balthaz shouted orders to his paralyzed troops, the vision changed, flesh melting onto the figures, leaving 9 identical leering soldiers of Macalette. Spurred on by their captain's shout and invocations of Tarim's name, the shaken Turanians rushed forward against these strange defenders, trusting their numbers to carry the day even against ensorcelled warriors. But they quickly found the soldiers impervious to their attacks, taking lethal spear thrusts and sword blows without so much as scratching their armour, all the while cutting down Turanians without mercy. Unwilling to retreat given his religious zeal and the closeness of Macalette's palace, Balthaz continued to spur his soldiers forward, but no headway was made against their untouchable, deadly foes. Hope would come for the Turanians in the form of the mercenary Conan, however, after Balthaz dispatched Fafnir as part of a small party to scale the nearby seawall and get past their foes. Fafnir's efforts were for naught, with the powerful Vanirman tumbling into the ocean, pierced through the arm by a flaming arrow. After seeing his friends fall, though, Conan swiftly scaled the seawall after him, getting a new vantage point from which to observe the battle below. Removed from the carnage, he noticed something the Turanians had missed. The unkillable soldiers were not simply identical, but mirror images of the centermost warrior, the 4 on each side of him inverted compared to their opposite numbers. Furthermore, the warrior in the center had kept a distance from the fighting, protected by the palace cavalry. falling silently from the wall behind the defenders of Macalette and taking a fallen Turanian's mace, Conan stove in the skull of the true foe, the deadly reflections fading to nothingness and the outnumbered cavalry retreating back within the palace's gates. It could scarcely be called a triumph, however, with well over 100 Turanians dying in the palace courtyard to fell a single soldier of Macalette, and with their numbers thinned and more enemies approaching from the quay, not even that tiny victory could be long savoured, with Balthaz's remaining forces forced to flee back to their boats to rejoin the fleet. The first day's fighting had been nothing short of a disaster for Yezdigerd and Turan, though the prince's resolve was undiminished, and both armies prepared themselves for the grueling siege that would follow. Come nightfall, his ships moored safely out of arrow range from Macalette's walls, Yezdigerd opted to use guile rather than force to match Karimov trickery, sending Balthaz with Conan and a small party of warriors to enter the city by stealth and capture the living Tarim as he had been previously stolen from Agripur, while another group was to take the walls under cover of darkness to kill the archers that had taken such a toll on the fleet during the day. Despite the current state of siege, Macalette's military discipline remained shockingly lax, given the disinterest of both Enatum and Karimov in conventional tactics. Following directions fed to Yezdigerd by 2 spies within the city, these Turanian stealth attacks went relatively successfully at first, with the team on the wall slaying numerous tired and surprised archers and building a human pyre to signal their success to the fleet. Balthaz's effort would be somewhat less successful, however, though his squad was able to penetrate the Temple of Tarim itself, with Conan even coming face to face with Karimov and reaching the living Tarim's chamber. Most of the squad would perish either to deadly traps or the jaws of Karimov's monstrous guardian hound, with the empty-handed Balthaz and Conan escaping by different routes after being separated. And both of these two would be lost to Yezdigerd as well, shortly after the botched mission. Escaping through a hidden cave connected by tunnel to the temple, Conan discovered upon his return that his dying friend Fafnir had been thrown overboard for the sharks on Balthaz's order. With a grudge having existed between the Turanian captain and the Cimmerian mercenary since their first meeting, Conan wasted no time in killing Balthaz and abandoning the Turanian army, swimming to Macalette's quay as his former comrades peppered the water around him with arrows. The loss of his right-hand man and the failure to recover the living Tarim would be a humiliating defeat for Yezdigerd, but his position remained strong, with his soldiers now disembarking from the fleet to surround Macalette by land, even as Conan found himself caught up in a new set of intrigues. In Macalette, the nighttime raid and the grisly pyre on the walls had finally hammered the severity of their plight into the minds of King Enatum and the citizenry. But while they might be outnumbered facing the Turanian invaders alone, the city-state did have alliances it might draw on to even the odds. Enatum's recent marriage to Melisandre of Pardashar, another city-state some 3 weeks' ride to the east, could compel her father, King Ganif, to come to Macalette's defense if summoned. Over-trusting in Karimov's sorcerous methods, Enatum had failed to send word to Ganif before the Turanians laid their tight siege around the city. The messenger to run the Turanian blockade and finally summon Pardashar to Macalette's defense would be Conan, who had entered Enatum's service out of necessity following his defection. On a moonless night, a mere 2 days after he had snuck into Macalette on a daring raid, the Cimmerian snuck out of the city by a hidden gate with a summons that might save the besieged city from destruction. For all the carnage of the siege's first bloody days, the following 6 weeks passed with little excitement. The Turanian noose grew tighter around the city, but after being caught unprepared previously, the people of Macalette had put their all to the city's defense, blocking the quay with barricades to foil landings from the sea and keeping vigilant watch against further raids. A few probing assaults sent by the impatient Yezdigerd were repulsed in short order, with their previous losses and rumours of the sorcery they faced sapping the morale of the besiegers. Thus, when a large mercenary force from Pardashar arrived, breaking through the Turanian lines around the city in a lightning attack and withdrawing within the walls to reinforce the defenders, it might have seemed that Yezdigerd's opportunity had passed, and that Macalette had foiled the ambitions of mighty Turan. But unbeknownst to Enatom, his father-in-law's promise of alliance counted for very little, and treachery was afoot in the camps of his newfound allies. The leader of the mercenary band was Red Sonja, a fiery-haired swordswoman who had been sent to Macalette as a thief first and a warrior second. Ganif cared little for his son-in-law's fate, or the fate of Macalette, but wished only to retrieve the precious Serpent Tiara, a mystical artifact that had served as Melissandra's dowry before the Turanians could sack the city and carry it across the Vilayet to Agrapur. A few short days after her arrival, after enlisting Conan to her aid with promises of pleasure, Sonja carried out a daring heist in the royal palace before abandoning both her erstwhile accomplice and Macalette, stealing out of the city with her plunder and her warriors to return to King Ganif. Nor would this be the only misfortune to befall Macalette. For its other protection, the sorcery of Karimov would soon be lost as well. Later the same night, as a disappointed Conan returned from the heist in the palace, he was set upon by soldiers of Macalette with orders from the sorcerer priest to arrest the Cimmerian, not for the still undiscovered theft of the Serpent Tiara, but due to a vision the paranoid magician had seen within his magic mirror of his death at Conan's hands. The vision would prove to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. The guards' failed attempt to arrest Conan only set his mind to vengeance, culminating in a showdown within Tarim's temple that left both the sorcerer and his many-tentacled fiendish servitor slain. With Karimov and his magics destroyed, the soothsayers of Turan now read victory in their divinations, spurring Yezdigerd to launch a final assault on the betrayed city. Perhaps most importantly, the hidden cave through which Conan had once escaped the temple after his failed night raid now lay exposed, the veil concealing it dispelled. As the bulk of the army threw themselves against the gates and walls of the city, a boatload of Turanians scaled the cliffs to the cave, taking the temple effortlessly, with Karimov slain and its defenders in disarray, and storming out to throw open a gate to the hordes outside. With the Turanians now within the city, the fate of Macalette was sealed, its fabled towers put to flame, as Yezdigerd's vengeful legions mercilessly fought their way through the streets to the palace. Stirred to bloodlust by the long siege and the theft of their living god, the Turanians would have no care for Macalette's citizens, or for its value as a vassal, razing to the ground the city that had dared to challenge their empire. Though King Enatom had been an ineffectual ruler, his subservience to Karimov, the source of Macalette's woes, he died a warrior's death fighting bravely against the invaders. Enatom's bloodline would not be extinguished with his city, however. Conan would save at least a part of Macalette before he fled, bringing both the pregnant Queen Melisandra and Chumbala Bey, a guard captain who had risked his life to help Conan against the foul sorceries of Karimov, to safety outside the walls and away from the rampaging invaders. Though their paths would part here, Melisandra would always remember the Cimmerian, and Enatom's heir would be born in the safety of Padishah. For Conan, Yezdigerd and Red Sonja, greater destinies still lay ahead. For Yezdigerd, the conquest of Macalette would be a triumph, and a first stepping stone to ever greater conquests to the east of the Vilayet. By the time Yezdigerd succeeded his father as king, he would already have propelled Turan to rival Aquilonia as the most powerful kingdom of the Hyborian Age. That the living Tarim, the prize so much blood had been shed over, had perished to a stray arrow as the Turanians seized his temple, dampened Yezdigerd's spirits precious little. For who amongst the victorious soldiers or cheering crowds would suspect the inbred invalid on the temple floor to have been their living god, or doubted the cloaked figure carried back to Agrapur with such fanfare? For their parts, Conan and Red Sonja would cross paths many more times in the future, as comrades or as rivals. Each would weave their own legends as two of the greatest heroes of the age, and in time, Conan would win his own throne, though not born with Yezdigerd's royal blood. Many more battles still lie ahead in the wild Hyborian Age, so tune into Wizards and Warriors next time for the dreaded Thugra Khotan's invasion of Karacha. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.